And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Thursday morning's flying weather. Not too bad here over the interior. There is some marginal VFR up over the north slope and areas of the Arctic coast, especially the east side up there. And also here along and north of the Alaska Range. Otherwise, good VFR down across into the North Gulf Coast area, Kodiak Island, mostly VFR. Northern Bering Sea here, down to about St. Matthew Island, VFR. Becoming marginal VFR for the Pribilof Islands, Eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, with the IFR, Atka, Adak westward, and marginal VFR for the southeast coast. And then for the afternoon, that becomes VFR for all of the Panhandle tomorrow afternoon, North Gulf Coast as well. Mostly VFR over interior Alaska, with still marginal VFR up here over the eastern Arctic coastal areas, and maybe the northwest coast here, Kivalina, Point Hope, Cape Lisburne. And big area of IFR here with the storminess out over the Bering Sea, advancing eastward with marginal VFR up to St. Paul and St. George Island, down to the Alaska Peninsula. IFR here into Unalaska Island into the afternoon. And then for Friday morning, this edges eastward here, just reaching possibly False Pass here. Otherwise, the Alaska Peninsula, not too bad with a lot of VFR there. Same thing for the southwest coast VFR. Pribilof's IFR up to St. Matthew Island. Northern Bering Sea into the Chukchi Sea and Arctic Ocean VFR. And a lot of VFR here over interior Alaska, except still hanging on to marginal VFR north of the eastern Alaska Range, as well as the eastern North Slope and Arctic coast. Southeast coast staying VFR. And that continues into Friday afternoon. Good VFR here for the Panhandle, North Gulf Coast, interior Alaska, all VFR, Chukchi Sea into the northern Bering again, including St. Lawrence Island, Nunivak Island, Bristol Bay, and much of the Alaska Peninsula will all be VFR. And Bering Sea, a lot of IFR out there, down to the eastern Aleutians, westward to Adak Island. And from there, taking a look at the Brooks Range passes, or two of them anyway, Anatuvik and Adigan, occasional marginal VFR at times for the day on Thursday, especially on the northern entrance of both those passes, VFR to the south. Lake Clark and Merrill, the Alaska Range, going for VFR conditions tomorrow, rainy VFR, windy, looking good, VFR, Isabel, and Mentasta, VFR. Tanita also another VFR day there, as well as Portage, Chilkoot and White, VFR. And for the freezing levels, well, again, not much to look at here at the surface, down along the central southeast coast, along the coastline, the south coast into Dixon Entrance, and then some warmer air pulling northward ahead of that storminess over the western Bering Sea. So we've got 8,000 feet here up over the western Aleutian areas. And with that, quite an area of considerable moderate rime icing here coming into edging in toward the Pribilofs late in the day, extending down to eastern Aleutians, westward to Adak and Atka, improving behind the front for Shimei and Attu. Pretty much icing free for interior Alaska. Could be some icing threats there out over the Gulf of Alaska, but that's staying south of the North Gulf Coast. And the jet stream here, the trough edging eastward, or moving eastward here now, elongated 33,000 feet over western Canada down to the Queen Charlotte Islands. So northwest winds, 130 to 150 knots coming down across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta from St. Lawrence Island, blowing across the Alaska Peninsula. Higher pressure here coming into the central Aleutians, then back around to southerly flow up to 130 knots ahead of that next storm farther to the west. And for the 9,000 foot wind flow chart, showing anywhere, mostly north winds here, 35 to 45 knots, but up to 55 knots for the Alaska Peninsula. Southwesterlies 55 knots there, western Bering Sea and Aleutians. And pretty light here over the northern interior, as well as the Copper River Basin, Upper Tanana Valley areas, North Gulf Coast and the Panhandle, light winds for 9,000 feet. And for 3,000 feet, still looking at some west winds at 40 knots there for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast up there. Otherwise, northerlies 30 to 55 knots across the southwest interior areas, and 60 knots with this storm, but that's well to the south, even south of the Gulf of Alaska. back to the west ahead of that big storm here. 40-knot winds for the Aleutians, about 50 knots here in the Bering Sea, with the stronger winds moving up toward the Russian coast. Turbulence, occasional moderate turbulence, pretty likely here. West in Nikolsky, so Adak and Atka particularly back to about Amchitka or Kiska Island. And also here, moderate turbulence expected, especially for small aircraft, Prince William Sound, Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, up into the western Alaska Range, Iliamna Lake area, light to isolated moderate chop, Alpine airstrip eastward to Kaktovik area, demarcation point, and a little bumpy there for the eastern Alaska Range, and light to isolated moderate turbulence into the northern panhandle.